I remember 3 years ago the EPA was going to ask farmers to pay $170-some per cow because when the cow walked, it expelled a little gas and it burped. That may be contributing to deterioration of our ozone, that methane gas. What if the EPA says you will now, as the owner of that well on your property, you're going to pay an assessment? Do you have provisions in your lease that protect you against these kind of changes that could occur at any time in the future? Deal with held by production in your lease, in your PU clause, whether it be storage, injection, tank battery, whatever. And make sure your lease is for production. And on initial offers, we will see leases that include injection wells, storage tanks, right-of-ways, a lot of things. And also oil and gas production. Those things are really separate agreements. And can you store foreign oil? Do you want a brine injection well in addition to that? Separate agreements to production. Right-of-ways, you're going to have a lot of issues with that. And that hasn't even come for us yet. We have a lot of oil and gas production, old oil and gas production, a lot of abandoned right-of-ways, and we'll see a lot more coming in. So you don't want to see that thrown into your oil and gas lease. For production or transportation of oil and gas produced elsewhere, foreign oil and gas. You'll surely need it to put your product to market, but if you want a permanent one, it should be a separate agreement. How about equipment protection, restoration of your fields, gates, those kind of things around this type of equipment? Make sure that you have it in your lease. And you need good provisions on field restoration, pipeline installation, things that put your topsoil back to where it needs to be, and also perhaps recoupment for those crop damages several years down the road as you document those yield reductions that can take place as a result of that ground disturbance. You may want certain types of gates or fencing put around these structures. If it's not in writing, it's not said. You may want certain types of fencing, as well as plantings. Some of you are picky about what you want planted. You can specify those things in your lease. Who will maintain it as well? Whose cost will that be? Describe that in your lease. The other thing is indemnification, protection against accidents, insurance, that you'll be held harmless. That needs to be covered in a landowner's portion of their lease. You can even specify the amount of insurance you'd like to seek in your protection. Ask your agent about what you should have. Arbitration. Believe it or not, at some point in the future, maybe it's 20 years from now, maybe you'll be the one that never has the case like Chris described, where you've got to get some matters settled. But it would be helpful, wouldn't it, for him and us if we had some sort of clause that described the arbitration process, whether we use 3 disinterested persons, the process for dispute resolution, or we take it to a court. I think all 3 should be options to you. And one remedy shouldn't necessarily disclude the other. Never disclude taking the matter to court. And hopefully you'll be able to use a cheaper method to resolve disputes because you will have them, or the next heirs will at some point. Use of resources. Initially, we saw in these agreements that we were giving them the right to use land, water, timber, other resources, and we weren't controlling that. You heard about all the water that was used in the fracking process. Now we have some farmers looking at selling it, and a couple have for that process. It'd be real value to water. But can they put in a well on your property and then extract water and use it for fracking? Or did you say? Maybe it says in the lease that we can use water, land anywhere we want. Maybe we can get rid of some of your timber. Have you been compensated for it? Got it appraised? Did you market it? Describe these things in your lease. Some of you put a lifetime into this farm, putting up buildings, structures, and if you're like me, over those years you dream about what you're going to do next. And your dreams could get upset if you don't agree to the location of these fixtures, structures, types, and distances. You see, you are in control of the lease. You are in control of the resource and where things go. Everything is negotiable to some extent, and you can specify distances if buildings can be put in, if pipelines can be put in, roadways, utilities. What have you said about that in your lease, if anything? How about assignment? Assignment means transfer or assign in part or in whole your lease. It'd be like my son was in college a few years ago and he had 9 roommates. Now I wonder sometimes if the owner of that house was aware that 9 different kids were, renting these different rooms. I hope you can confine your lease to a specific geologic strata. All right? The producing strata that a company wants. You saw that chart Chris gave you. It had lots of different layers and floors. If we gave a company the unrestricted right to assign in part that lease, 20 years from now, how many different owners of your geology would there be? A lot, perhaps. Would you even know who they are? Have you put in your assignment clause that you at least have to be notified? That's a sticky issue for companies. They want to right to assign this. But if you at least get them confined to a geology, maybe you're only dealing with that particular formation. Audit rights. You'll want the rights to review records of your production from your wells at least once a year, at your cost, of course. Warranty title. Some people got stuck signing this. Most companies will give this up, and to the best of your knowledge, you have the ability to sell this resource. Warranty title means an initial agreement. They'll often ask you for it. You guarantee you can sell those mineral rights, and we'll defend it in court at your cost. Be very careful about signing something like this, because most companies do their due diligence anyhow in researching your title work. Paying quantities. Once your lease is in effect, you've got a well. How long does it stay in effect? As long as it produces in what? Paying quantities. Can anybody answer what a paying quantity is for me? Is that defined in your lease? I got a check one time, $5 every 3 months. You're laughing. Hey, that's a check. And it was sinking my driveway, the brine trucks coming in and out, and I'm like, boy, that's $5. I'm not sure it's covering my inconvenience. I wonder if it's paying for that man out there to do the work. I would define at what quantity of royalty that I'm going to be getting next time in economic terms, or as close as I can, that will keep that lease in effect. We do get, if you're the one drilled on in Ohio, we get free gas. That was offered to me Saturday. Or if I'm the one drilled on, I sometimes get offered a payment in lieu of free gas. I don't know if that's customary here, but that's something we've been able to negotiate. This deep gas is under high pressure, might be something I don't want to handle, but maybe I could negotiate for a payment in lieu of that. How about the end of lease? I think a lot of people, they look at a lease and they never deal with when it stops. Everything on earth will stop, including this well at some point. How does your lease deal with end date? What defines it? What production do you have to have? When does equipment have to be removed? How many months after that operation? Were you furnished with a release of lease that clearly clears your title? And who recorded it? Was it your responsibility or the company's? Deal with the end point in your lease and production, because it's supposed to come one day. Don't leave it nebulous. Be aware, some of you will get to talking there in the next couple of years, and you'll say, I got that company X lease, company Y's lease, oh, that's a good lease. Be aware. Companies have multiple leases, and they have multiple addendums to these leases. You cannot, until you look at all the terms, you really can't adequately say, just because Bob or Sally had that lease and you got the same one, you got the exact same terms. Here in your state, you don't have to record the entire lease document. So it makes it hard for you to go to the recorder's office and look at those records and see. What we see is most companies now are recording memorandums of leases that don't describe all those multiple pages of terms that we were able to negotiate. So I wanted you to be aware of that, and if you have to change some of the things in your lease, you usually do them through an Exhibit A or an addendum. And many times companies will have changes to their original terms. They'll give you, if you'll ask, in those addendum sections or Exhibit A. A little bit on pooling and unitization. Again, limit the acreage that can be done. For small property owners, less than 40 acres or so, this may give you the only way to participate in royalty. For large property owners, limit it and ask yourself then, what do you do with the rest of the land that's not being utilized? Can you sever it then from the lease? Does your Pew clause release it? Those kinds of things. Here's a couple examples of some property that's unitized. You have 30 acres and 10 acres, 40 acres. These two property owners, landowner A and B, they share in the royalty off of this unitized land. According to the acreage they had contributed there. So property A gets 25%, has less acres. Property B, 75% of the agreed upon royalty. Gets more complicated, though, with some horizontal drilling, bigger units of land, maybe some directional drilling. Some properties, like C, get left out. What happens to their property? Do you assume if you were C, you're going to be collecting royalty? Maybe you will, maybe you won't, by the terms of your lease. It's not a safe assumption to make. You need to ask yourself how your lease deals with you if you're C. Do you want to be released from unitization? How about property B? Some irregular structures have been created in that property. Maybe you didn't want that to happen. Those structures you see above and below that blue line where development is at there, I don't know if that'll work, right here and up here, that's really not going to be very marketable ground perhaps. How does your lease deal with that? Maybe the rest of Farmer B wants the land released on that side. Unitization in your Pew clause is very important at dealing with these kinds of issues. Why don't you just leave then? All right. Landowners group. How about landowners group? All right. There's all kinds of landowner groups that have started in our area, and they're groups of landowners working together, saying we want similar terms. They hire an attorney many times to write the lease. Whoops. And there's different types. Most of them in our area are run by attorneys. And they generally take a percentage of your signing bonus and maybe a percentage of the royalty as well. Others are done by brokerage groups. Will do the same. They'll take anywhere from 1 to 7% of your signing bonus, and I've seen them take as high as 5% of the royalty, sometimes both the signing bonus and royalty. And we've seen just landowners, contiguous landowners who have their mineral rights working together. Sometimes they're able to negotiate a good lease together when they get an attorney to write the lease for them. So there's all kinds of different types of groups that may help you get better terms. But ask yourself some questions about these because they'll be meeting in your area soon. You know, what are you going to be paying them? 1 to 8% of the signing bonus? 5%? We've been lately able to confine them to nearly 1% of the signing bonus only for some attorney-led groups. And then others may have no cost associated with them. Some of them will let you join more than one group. Some of them will show you the lease that they're going to get for you ahead of time. Others won't. Others will say, well, we're going to do our best to negotiate. When you get to the date to sign, you can back out if you're one. But you need to ask yourself, how are those handled? Are you able to back out at the last moment if you don't like the lease? Are there consequences for getting out of a landowner group? For example, could you renegotiate with the company later? Landowner groups vary in the service they'll give you after the leasing's over. Some will represent you legally, some won't. Some will have a minimum acreage that you'll need to be part of the group. Can be a smart thing to do to join one of these if you have very few acres, because you may get left out of leasing. Otherwise, landowner groups sometimes can prohibit cherry picking of you out of that lease. It's tough to do, but they try to do that with some of these groups. Not many will make your warranty title. A few have, though. Some give you the right as members to negotiate on that lease and have comment. Some don't. Some are ran by a board of directors. Some of all of you participate. But look at that leadership. Ask yourself, are they communicating well with you? Because you will have a lot of questions. The time from actually getting your money to signing your lease, it's not all about the lease. It's also about getting paid. That time can be a long period of time. And many times you'll work with different companies and different leases over a long period of time, and it can be exhausting, mentally, physically straining. A landowner group can take a lot of that off your back. You can get more information at this website on leasing. Our DNR website is up there for you. Lots of good stuff. And a lot of people, when we get done, ask for, well, what does a landowner-friendly lease look like? Well, I put some websites on here on different landowner associations for you to take a look at some of their terms. And I didn't include that in your handout, so if you want those, you'll have to write that down. And with that, I think we're going to take time now to answer some of the questions you have.
Does anybody else have any questions on their cards? Raise your card up. We'll come by and pick it up. If for some reason while they're answering a question pops in your head, please write it down. We'll come by and pick it up. These guys are willing to stay till 8:30. That's when we said the meeting's over. So if there's more questions, we're shutting her down at 8:30 regardless. So feel free to get the questions, and we'll got a few he can answer, and some good ones actually. So, is there any more?
Okay. First question here, what are the names of the chemicals used in the hydraulic fracturing? The best answer I can give you, if you look in my handout that I gave you, there on the second page, on the inside bottom of the second page, we have some of the things that are used. I don't have the exact names of it. The Department of Natural Resources may have it. This is what they gave me. I'm not sure. What they told me is they have the primary products that they use are listed there. There are some proprietary things that have a mixture of some products that are stated that are in there, or something to that effect, but they have to report exactly what it is that they use. I've heard people say that they inject benzene and toluene down in when they do the hydraulic fracturing process. I've never heard that to be the case, but I know that's where benzene and toluene comes from. It's down there in the ground during some of the production process. So hopefully I gave the best shot at trying to get an answer to that. Where and how do you get your water tested in Illinois?
Well, that's a good question for your extension office to handle. I can tell you what we look for in our area is to get an independent laboratory, follow our EPA guidelines. The cost will range from $90 to $300, depending on what you want tested for, to establish that baseline. Put in your lease, too, a water protection clause in case your water was impacted. That protects the quantity, quality, response time with a given amount of hours, and provides you those laboratory results. I hired an independent laboratory to drive to my house, pull my sample, take it, and provide me the results prior to drilling. Companies now are also taking that initiative. I think a lot of you will want to do that on your own as well prior to drilling and exploration, because establishing a baseline for the quality and quantity of your water is something that you don't want to argue after the fact.
Yeah. 44% of the water wells in a test, there was a pre-test, post-test over in Pennsylvania, prior to drilling and after drilling. I had it in my handout, but I forgot to mention it today. 44% of the wells that were pre-tested would have failed a test for high levels of E. coli, turbidity, and manganese issues. So getting your water tested ahead of time is a very important thing to do. And in the post-test, there were no really significant differences, except they found some elevated levels of bromide in some of the water, and I'm not sure what bromide is, but I noticed it was the active ingredient in my cough syrup. So I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I just found that interesting when I looked at the active ingredient in my cough syrup. If you don't find anywhere else, go to your local health department and find out where they get their water tested. Our health departments get their water tested at that independent place where Clif got his tested. So somewhere, most health departments have to get their water tested somewhere, and it's probably you may be able to use them to get it done. If I purchase mineral rights at a location and existing production on adjacent property is subject to unitization with the rights I buy, do I get that income, or does it remain with the former owner unless the new mineral deed specifically includes it? Clif, that's your question.
I'll interpret that the way I think. If you buy a piece of property, you sever the minerals from it, sell it to somebody else, or you owned it before and severed it. If you sever the mineral rights and you take them with you from the surface rights, so then you get the royalty you agreed upon there, whatever was in your lease. We're seeing that, in fact, a lot in Ohio, the severing, in which it's not common in the past. But lately, companies are offering, I've got offers in the mail, I'll sever your mineral rights from your property, I'll pay you $2,500 an acre to do it. Keep the money, keep your lease money. Another offer we've seen is, I'll purchase your royalty. You sign a lease, great. You may never collect royalty, they may never drill on you, but I'll purchase your royalty from you for $2,500 an acre. So lots of offers coming through. But severing, now we see farms being sold all the time with mineral rights severed from the surface rights. Somebody else will collect royalty in those cases.
Where will all the water come from needed in the hydraulic fracturing process? That's a good question. Some of it can come from municipal water treatment, from municipal water sources. The initial ones are drilling over in our area. I noticed, Clif, there's a lot of lakes nearby or ponds. Some of it's on some of our American Electric power ground that they used to mine coal at. Some of those are right next to the lakes. In my county, there's a pretty good sized river. It's probably a little bit smaller than the Wabash. There are some wells there that can produce over 1 million gallons of water a day and not drop the water table more than a half an inch. They're interested in doing some of the water. Again, Clif mentioned earlier, if you have water, maybe that can be something that can be negotiated in terms of selling. How can I know if I'm receiving royalties for gas and oil under my property if the actual well is not on my property?
You'll be asked to sign a lease if the well's not on your property. If they drill underneath of you, and by the way, even leasing is optional. You can have, and we've seen non-development leases where they drill underneath of you and no activity takes place on the surface. But if we're drilling underneath of you now, Chris had described that process being so accurate they can hit a pop can a mile away. They GPS that drill bit. They know where it's at. They know if they went under your property. A permit for the drilling is turned into your mineral resources at the state level. If your resources are being taken, well, then you'll be paid for those resources according to the terms of your lease.
Do landowners get any royalties if the well is on their property? I guess if you have the mineral rights, you do.
If you own the mineral rights, if you don't, then that's what you agreed to when you bought it, if you did your title work.
Now, it would be nice if you could work with the people that have the mineral rights. If you could get the spud fee, there'd be no skin off your back if you don't have the mineral rights. So if you have a relationship or know who the people have the mineral rights, that would be a nice gesture to them, which shouldn't cost them anything. If landowners don't participate, how is their property avoided?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, was that the question? Okay.
That's something you need to look at closely because I don't understand all your forced unitization laws in this state. We have that in Ohio. If we don't participate, they get 90% of the ground around us that we can be forced unitized. It's not necessarily a bad thing in Ohio because we can choose to actively participate in the well or be a passive participant, which if you're active, if you're a well owner, it could be pretty profitable for you. Bottom of the line is when it comes to right-of-ways or leases, you might want to keep a lease on the table even though you think the terms are a little outrageous. Companies will document the times that they talk to you, the times that they've sent you letters, and they'll need to provide proof that they at least tried to lease you several times. There's provisions on that.
But also, Clif, if you are forced to unitize, they can't put the pad on your property. They can drill under you, but not put the pad on the property. What's the size of the drill bit? It can be anywhere from as small as 8 inches, probably up to 20 inches. So, you know, depending as they use the different size casings, the size of that drill bit can end up dropping. What is a mineral acre? I have never heard of that before. Have you, Clif?
Mineral acre, well, 1 acre of ground would be an acre in a mineral lease, for example. If I have 100 acres, I might list all 100 acres. Be specific in your lease. X dollars for X surface acres, X amount of total dollars. Don't make assumptions about your dollar amounts per acre and total amount of money due.
How can they get non-liquid gas out and not have to pay a landowner? If they get non-liquid gas out and you're the landowner with the mineral rights, you need to be getting paid for that.
Yeah, and you would hopefully be able to ask for a meter to be located there on well site as well, something you could look at.
On all of the wells there in Ohio, they have a meter that gets changed, a readout that comes out every week that can be read and monitored. So I assume something is similar to that here. The New Albany Shale has vertical fractures naturally. Are these fracture planes oriented in any particular direction? Like I mentioned earlier, like from northwest to southeast, I don't know. I know that Utica Shale, you know, originally we started talking about that, we thought the units would be the same as kind of like quarter sections or section land, but I'm not sure how it's oriented here. And how is the length of the horizontal bore documented accurately? I think Clif kind of addressed that with all the GPS coordinates and documented with the Department of Natural Resources. And finally, if one does not lease, can the person who leased the ground next to you go on your land with the fracking?
Go underneath.
I
guess if you
that.
were forced unitized, they
Yeah.
could go underneath of you and frack.
But if not,
they'll try to lease you.
yeah.
And then it'll
If not,
be
they can't.
your choice to participate or not.
And in Ohio, by law, you have to be 500 feet away from the boundary. So if they use a 640-acre unit, it has to come in 500 feet each direction as a buffer from the boundaries in that unit.
I was talking to your Farm Bureau attorney in the back in Ohio as well. They said forced unitization has not been used very much here, and it hasn't been used very much in Ohio. I hope we've answered most of your questions. Are there any others?
Any other questions? Well, let's say thank you to Clif and Chris. We really appreciate them driving down here.